Public access to ChatGPT in November 22 was revolutionary. It changed how we consumed data and information, and it was not limited to an industry. It spread wide and across the globe, followed by a plethora of applications built on it. Models like ChatGPT and others such as Gemini, they have broader scope. Not easy to train similar models, expensive to use, and then not open sourced. So you don't know the details and you cannot run them locally. Businesses needed alternates. Welcome to Ollama, an open source project that simplifies you to run LLMs on your local machine, which could be used for different purposes. But there's always a but. But what are the benefits and the possibilities? Benefits and advantages and disadvantages of using and running uncensored models locally on your system or via an API. All of these are good questions, but I do not have answers to them. Don't worry, because our speaker today definitely does. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining in for another IntelliJ Idea live stream. I'm your host, Mala Gupta. And now let me add our speaker to the stream. Hey, Ken, it's a pleasure to have you present with us today. An absolute pleasure.
Thank you, Mala. I'm very happy to be here.
All the pleasure is all ours. And let me quickly introduce Ken for the folks who don't know Ken, which is I would assume just 1% of our audience today. So Ken's full name is Kenneth Kousen, but friends like us, they get the privilege to call him just Ken. And he's not just Ken, he's more than enough. So that was my part with your Ken. So
Of course.
Ken is a rock star. He is a Java champion. He is JavaOne Rock Star and Grails Rock Star. And the Rock Star Awards are for folks at conferences who are exceptional speakers. And so we have one for you today on Idea Livestream. He's author of many books on Mockito, Kotlin, Java, Gradle, Groovy, and others such as Helping Your Boss Help You. Ken, you have a long list of credentials. Oh my God. So creator of popular newsletter Tales from Jar Side. He has his YouTube channel, excellent academic credentials, including a PhD in aerospace engineering from Princeton. I can stop now, Ken, because otherwise we'll use the full hour for the credentials. So
I'll just say about that I never had any difficulty impressing my girlfriend's parents. The
oh
parents always liked me. Impressing the girlfriends is a whole different situation, And of course, if my wife ever finds out about the girlfriends, okay, never mind. Thank you very much. It's great to be here.
We look forward to learning from you. Before I let you take the stage, I want to ask you a quick question. So when you were working with experimenting with what you are going to show to us in today's session, what was your aha moment? Because that's one thing which I really like when I try new things. There are a couple of aha moments that pop up all the time. So what was yours for this thing?
Well, the neat thing about Ollama is that it allows you to run these large language models locally. And unfortunately, what that meant for me was that I installed a bunch of these large language models locally. And while I had always thought that my laptop had a fair amount of disk space and a fair amount of RAM, now I'm keenly aware of those limitations, because that's the cost. You're still paying, you're just not paying a subscription fee. You're not paying a cloud provider. You're paying for your own hardware. And now I'm very aware of those limitations.
Absolutely. No free lunches, right?
Right.
Right. So with that, I'll quickly talk about some of the housekeeping details, and then I'll let you take the stage. Everyone who's watching the stream today, please use YouTube chat to post your questions. Ken will keep an eye on the questions as you post them, but if you ask a lot of questions, he would just ignore them. No, I did not mean that. So we had Kirill from IntelliJ Idea team. He is a tech lead of AI code completion. Kirill, me, and Ken, we all would try to answer your questions as you post them. The session is being recorded, of course, and will be hosted on our YouTube channel and also on JetBrain's Twitch channel. So if you haven't already subscribed to our channel, now is the time to do so that you do not miss similar content in the future. And last but not least, if you like today's session, which I hope you will, do not forget to like the video. And on that note, Ken will add your things to the screen, and and I'll let you move forward with your session and have fun. I'll be backstage. Have fun.
Oh, well, thank you very much. This is a set of slides, very thin, not a lot of slides here. I want to talk about the web pages and run from the command line and show some code. So that's what's going to be going on with this. But I thought I'd put together a few of these, and then I'll send them to Mala when we're done, and then she can make them available however JetBrains decides to make these things available. So the idea here is to use local large language models to run them on your own hardware locally. And that way you're not paying for every access. You don't have to worry about tokens or anything like that. You also don't have to worry about your information being broadcast over the internet. And as a side benefit of this, there's this whole concept of an uncensored AI model. And I need to tell you what that's all about and what they mean by that, because it's not completely obvious. And then I'll try to run a couple of examples just to show you what the side benefits of that are. So forgive the slightly clickbaity title there, but that's the idea. Now, I do want to mention, if you're interested, here is my contact information. I'll just say that there's my email address, homepage, blog. I still have a Twitter account, even though that place is basically a cesspool at this point, but I do have an account there. I'm also on Mastodon and on Blue Sky and Threads or whatever, LinkedIn. Feel free to keep in touch. The Tales from the Jar Side newsletter comes out every Sunday. It's hosted on Substack, and I also have a YouTube channel of the same name, at Tales from the Jar Side, that has many technical videos as well as the newsletter videos as well. If you do go to that QR code is going to the YouTube channel. So just letting you know. The only other thing I'll mention about the books is that I am working on a new one, which is going to be called, at least the working title at the moment is Adding AI to Java. And the presentation today is going to be covered by some information in one of those chapters. So let's talk about this. So Ollama is, it used to be at Ollama.ai. It was another one of those registered domains that goes to that little island in the Caribbean whose file extension is .ai. And they've made what is it, like 20% of their government budget for last year was based on companies registering domains there. At any rate, now that goes to Ollama.com. Anyway, and this is the thing I like about this is there's actually several different products you can use to install open source or free large language models on your own machine. The reason I like Ollama is that in addition to hosting the models, it also runs a tiny little local web server so that there's an API that allows you to access this local large language model on port 11434. So you can go to 11434 on localhost and send REST requests and get back REST responses. And this is what allows me to integrate it into my own system. Again, there's no key or anything like that I have to set up. I just have to be able to access the model on my machine. So the one issue, as I was mentioning with Mala before, is that the downloaded models can be pretty substantial. And I do want to talk about small, medium, and large and huge ones and things like that. And I'll get to that in a moment. Again, the real benefit here is that everything is free. You don't have to, traditionally, these cloud models charge you by the number of tokens, and 1,000 tokens is roughly 750 words in any major language that you're using. That's pretty typical. And in this case, it still reports things like number of tokens you're using, but it doesn't matter because there's no charge for anything. You are, in effect, paying, however, because what you're paying is for your own hardware, the hardware that you're running the model on. The other side benefit, again, and this is going to come up when we talk about these uncensored models, is that I'm not sending any of my questions or getting any of these answers. I'm not sending them to some cloud provider. I'm not sending my own proprietary information off-site. Also, assuming the NSA is monitoring all this, they won't know about the interactions I have with the local model. Now, of course, if you want to run this on Windows and they turn on that new recorder, maybe all bets are off, but I don't have anything like that now. So I'm going to assume that I don't have anything being recorded other than our live stream. So now there are many different models here. Now I have the slides here, but let me go to the homepage here and show you what I'm talking about. So this is the Ollama homepage at ollama.com. If you go to ollama.ai, it redirects to this, and you see they have a nice little stick figure of a llama. Llama for those of you who are probably familiar, is a model from Facebook/Meta, whatever they want to call themselves these days. And Llama is just putting vowels in LLM, large language model, and they threw in a couple of A's to make it Llama. This means that you will see other llama related puns in this website. Like there's a model called Vicuna, and I had no idea what a Vicuna was. And it turns out a Vicuna is another animal in the same family with llamas and camels and things like that. I think they also do alpacas as well. So you'll see terms like that floating around just for the humor. Phi 3, by the way, the one you're seeing there also is the one from Microsoft, and that one's doing pretty well. Mistral has both a commercial version and an open source version, and Gemma is the one from Google. That's basically their scaled down and open source version of Gemini. So it doesn't have the same power, but it's there. Now, the installation's almost trivial. If I click on the download link, you see that there is an installer for Mac. You have to be on Mac 11 or later, but that's pretty much everybody. If you're on Linux, then you can install it with a shell script running it through curl and just piping it through shell. If you're on Windows, they also have a downloadable installer, and they say it requires Windows 10 or later, and they still put it in as preview. They called it experimental for a while, but all the people I've talked to have had it run without any problem. I haven't heard anybody have any difficulties with that. Now, the documentation on this page is very thin. There's not a lot here. There is a link to their Discord server, but where the real docs are going to be, and I'll go there in a moment, is in the GitHub repository. But before I do that, there's this models link. So in order to install Llama, you just run the installer, and I don't know if you could see it. It's going to be really tiny on this live stream. There's a tiny little llama icon in my title bar that shows me that this has been installed. And in fact, I can go to localhost 11434, and I will get this response that Ollama is running. So it is running this web server on port 11,434, and that's how I know it's happening. Now, most of what you do with Ollama, you could do from the command line, but it could also happen inside here as well. So if I go back to the download page or the home page here, the next step after installing Ollama is to install one or more models. So this models link is ollama.com/library, and the models come up by default in order of featured, and there's Llama 3, the latest and greatest, supposedly, from Meta that is available through this system. Notice the little tabs here. These are just labels that represent how many parameters the model has in it. 8B is 8 billion, 70B is 70 billion. Like I say, these are not small. These are multi-gigs in size. And the more parameters you have, the more accurate the model is. The more that you get a decent answer out of it, the less it hallucinates. I always have a really tiny model. In fact, there's one in this list called Tiny Llama, which I keep mostly for entertainment value. I mean, you could ask that questions and you get the most bizarre, ridiculous answers you ever saw. But it's nice to have a range of models. The only problem is the bigger the model, the more disk space it takes when you download it, the more RAM it takes when you run it. If I switch from featured to, say, newest, then you can see there's this new Falcon 2 model that has, well, the training was over 5 trillion tokens, but it's an 11 billion parameter model. And then they have variations like Llama based on a different underlying model, and that does some RAG stuff too, the retrieval augmented generation, and on and on and on. So this is the list of models, and the way you install it is, I'm going to go to a command prompt here, and once you have Ollama installed, then it puts a command called Ollama in your path. And if I just run that, you see there's a whole, not a huge list, but there's a list of commands. If I wasn't running that server automatically, then this would start it up. I can also show which models I have installed, and this is where I've kind of gone overboard. If I say list here, you see these are all the models that I have installed locally. And there's a directory under the Ollama installation that shows where the data lives and everything. But take a look at the sizes here. So this is a medium-sized model. It's not huge, but it's not tiny either. This Wizard LM one is one of the uncensored ones that they have available, and it's roughly 10, 11 billion parameters, takes about 7.5 gigs on your disk. A small one would be like this Lava that runs on Llama 3. Lava, the V stands for visual. So this is one that allows you to upload images, and it will try to tell you what's in the image. It's basically a description of the image itself. And I was running through a few of those, one based on Llama 3, one based on Phi 3, and there's a few others. Now this, on the other hand, Llama 3 itself comes in a 7 billion parameter model, or what was it, 6 billion over here, I guess. Let me go back to the featured and click on that. And what you'll see, yeah, they have an 8 billion parameter model and a 70 billion parameter model. And to see all the details, you can click on this tags link, and the tags link shows you the latest, which is the one you download by default. And you'll see that hash there matches this one, the 8 billion parameter model, which also has the latest tag on it. There's a 70 billion parameter model. Now, I hate to report on things that are supposedly coming, because this is a field that's just filled with hype, right? That tons of companies are promising things that may or may not ever show up, or may or may not do what you ask for. Any rate, there's supposedly a 400 billion parameter model that's going to be released of Llama 3. I'll believe it when I see it, but it won't affect me at all, because there's no way I could possibly run that model on this hardware. But it is available, or will be available supposedly. So my big ones I have here is I have a 70 billion parameter model of Llama 3. I've got Mixtral. Mixtral is the Mistral version, that French company Mistral, that has a very high quality model that uses the so-called mixture of experts approach to doing solutions. It's doing different resolution at different levels. It's very interesting. So that's the biggest one I have. I'm not going to run that now, because that would bring my machine to its knees. The funny one I was telling you about was Tiny Llama, which is less than a gig on the disk. And then I've got some Gemma ones and a handful of others. So if you want to install one, all you have to do is say, Ollama run, and then pick a model. I'll do the Tiny Llama one just to show you how quickly it can load. And you see that loaded right away because that's so small. And then I could ask it a question like, what is the sum of the lengths of the words hello and world? And it's already wrong, as you can see, because it can't count the lengths of the words here on Tiny Llama. It's all pattern matching. But you can see how you can put in questions. It's got a little history mechanism. You could move up and down. If you start off with 3 double quotes, like in a Java text block, you can put in multi-line questions. And when you're done, you just say bye and you're out. Okay, so that's the basic idea. If you want to load a model without, or if you want to download a model without running it, you say Ollama pull and give it the name, and it would just download it and make it available. So that's running it from the command line, and you could do that at any time. And it just, let me warn you, if you decide you want to load one of these models, even the small ones take a little while. So it depends on the quality of your internet connection there. Okay. Just checking the questions to see if there's anything that, because the question says, is Ollama purely a community project, or is there some legal entity behind it? That I'm not sure about, because I believe it's a community project. There is a Discord server where you could ask questions like that, and the creators do answer questions in that Discord server. They do hang out there. In fact, you saw there was a link directly to the Discord invite on the front there. So I don't know what the licensing details are inside there. I'm not sure. But of course, the answer, which is going to lead me to where I was headed anyway, is probably in the GitHub repository. So here's the GitHub repository, and it's under an MIT license. So hopefully that gives you an idea what we're looking at in this case. Now, the documentation is much more extensive on the GitHub repository. In addition to having the links, they also, by the way, have a Docker image that you could run if you want to do that. How does it compare to Llama file by Mozilla? There are, I can't compare it to all the other different products that allow you to run locally, because I haven't tried a lot of them, but I will say this one provides that web server. And that's useful for me because then the model is just a RESTful web service and I could access it from Java. See, I don't need the Python library. I don't need the JavaScript library. I can just treat it as another RESTful web service. And if there's one thing we know how to do in Java, it's interact with RESTful web services. Now, speaking of that, let me scroll down. There's a section here called REST API. Here it is. REST API. Ollama has a REST API for running and managing the models. And this curl request is demonstrating that REST API. So there's a generate endpoint and there's also a chat endpoint. They're different. The generate endpoint is very, very simple. The JSON object you send specifies which model you want, and the prompt is the question you're asking. There's also a property called stream, which I'm going to set to false because if you don't set it, you just get back one word at a time. There's a question about making models. And yes, Ollama is very good about allowing you to take an existing model and making a new one based on that source and just varying parameters and setting your own system prompt and all the sorts of things you might want to do to customize a particular model. Now, you can't retrain the weights exactly. The weights are what they are. Sometimes they don't refer to these models as open source, but they refer to them as open weights, W-E-I-G-H-T, because what you're actually downloading is the trained weights. In principle, you could supply your own information, but that I generally do with a framework. I would use something like LangChain4j or Spring AI in order to do that work. At any rate, the other thing I want to tell you about this REST link here is that the generate endpoint is very simple. The chat endpoint is a little bit more like the traditional APIs to work with ChatGPT or Claude or any of the others, in that you have a messages array where the roles are either user or assistant, so that this is how you could have a conversation. I should mention that if you haven't interacted with these AI models programmatically, one thing you need to keep in mind is that all these requests are independent of each other. The models are stateless. This is different from the behavior you get when you go to the web page. When you go to ChatGPT and start typing in, it's got a context window. It's keeping track of some number of previous requests until it exceeds the context and then starts forgetting things. These requests are all completely independent. So if you want a conversation that remembers the previous answers, you just keep adding to this array. So you get back an answer when the role of assistant, and then in your next request, you would add that to the messages array on your next submit. So the messages would alternate user assistant, user assistant, user assistant, and so on, depending on how much of the context window you have available. Again, the frameworks like LangChain4j or Spring AI will automate that process and make it a lot simpler. But I'm going to stick with the simplest stuff right now. Okay, with that in mind, let me go to a little bit of my code here. And I'll put the GitHub repository for this. I think I sent it to Mala earlier, but I'll send the GitHub repository for this in the chat. And I have two different versions of how I implemented this. I have one project that I just called OpenAI Demo, where I do everything without using the Spring framework. I'm just using, in fact, if you look at my service here, you could see that I'm using Java's HTTP client in a try with resources block and setting the accept and the content type headers, going to the URL, sending a post request with my body in there, and I'm using the JSON parser to put that in the body, get back a response. I generally do these things synchronously because I'm on my local machine, and then return it and deal with that. But the one I'm going to show you actually is this project, the one called OpenAI Client. This one is a Spring Boot project. So the benefit of using Spring, of course, is that it has its own networking. I've got a REST client. I have the HTTP Exchange interfaces. I've got all kinds of nice stuff. And it's got a built-in JSON parser. I've got that one happens to be Jackson. So if I want to customize any of the behavior, I have to use the Jackson annotations on that. There's a question about how much RAM do these things take, like Mixtro or whatever. Here's I don't have a good rule of thumb, other than my own anecdotal experience, I have about 64 gigs of RAM on my machine, and I'm always running some other stuff like IntelliJ. So I don't have it completely unencumbered. I do have some stuff in there. I can run the 22 billion parameter models pretty comfortably. They just take a little while to load, but they work out okay. The 7 billion parameters models, I can generally run more than one of those. And Ollama will keep each model in memory for, I think the timeout period is 5 minutes, but there's a parameter you can use to adjust that timeout period. Also, they've recently added the capability to allow you to submit requests in parallel and have multiple models in memory, but those are still under development. So I haven't used that a lot, but it's there. The 64 billion or the 70 billion parameter models, I can load, but I can't be doing anything else. So it's going to take a while, and it may be sluggish as well. So that's just a really vague rule of thumb. Do the models support embeddings? They do, but there's no embedding model in the REST API. So in other words, I think you need to go through the framework mechanisms that will add all that supplementary mechanism for you. For example, LangChain4j, which is, LangChain4j and Spring AI are my favorite Java-based AI frameworks. Both of those support Ollama directly. So if you have an Ollama model available to you, then in Spring AI, you could auto wire in the OpenAI, or not the OpenAI, the Ollama chat model, or whatever they're going to call it when they release version 1. Same thing with LangChain4j. You can just instantiate the Ollama one, and then you use the rest of the framework to do stuff about doing the encoding or the embeddings or any of those sorts of things as we go. Okay, so let me show you what I'm going to deal with here. My tendency is to make constants for all the individual models. And by the way, I do have the wonderful JetBrains AI assistant built into here with a subscription. So this class that I made that just has all these public static final string constants, you can see I asked it earlier today, should I be using an enum for that? I basically had it loaded up, and it suggested a refactoring. And I said, I think that would make a natural enum. And it said, oh, you could do that. But it brought up the thing I was thinking as well. This is purely string comparisons with no additional attributes. An enum might be overkilling. Okay, but at any rate, it might be overkill. And that might be true as well. But I just wanted to mention that I have that available. Now, before I run the code, let me tell you a bit more about this idea of uncensored. So there's a bunch of the models, and these are the vision ones that I'm playing with. I'm preparing a video on that today, so that'll be coming out later. The term uncensored was coined by a guy by the name of Eric Hartford in his own blog post, and I have a link to that, and I have it open in a tab if you want to see it. But the basic argument is that the models that we use that come from the vendors are, quote, aligned. They all have alignment, and this alignment is to avoid getting them into any trouble. It's avoiding any controversial questions or answers. It just basically won't answer things. So why would we want things that are uncensored? And if you look at the article, these are the sorts of answers they provide. They say, oh yeah, for research. And I'm thinking, yeah, right, let's call it research. That's why we want an uncensored model. Sure. Another argument is that these models all come from companies that know each other and have some common assumptions about what culture we live in. And of course, there's people in this presentation from all over the world. Different cultures have different conventions and things they want and things they don't want. And if you're going to make your own model that is aligned to your culture, it's best to start with one that isn't aligned, that doesn't have all those restrictions on it. Also, there are use cases like writing a novel or something like that, where you can say you're doing this and the model still won't answer questions about it. It still won't do anything because it's prevented. Another quote that came right out of that article was, hey, it's on my machine. I should be allowed to do what I want, which is, very developer attitude. And again, this is just not in the spirit of open source, is to have the restrictions on there. You should be allowed to do whatever you want. So what did he do, which started off this uncensored approach? He said, okay, he looked at the data set to figure out which parts were refusals, as he called them, and figured out how to identify and remove them. And if you want to see the details, that blog post has the Python code that he used to identify and remove them. I just have to warn you, if you're getting into actually training the model, which is what he's talking about, retraining a model, now we're talking tens or hundreds of hours of training on major hardware. So I don't want to make an uncensored model myself. I don't have the resources for that or the desire, frankly, but it is available for download once you've created one of these models or once other people have made them. So there's a question about, is there hardware support for local GPUs? I know they're working on that. I'm not sure if it's ready yet. But that's something that if you're in the Discord server, there'll be a little pop-up and they'll say, here's the new version. And now it works with this type of GPU or that type of GPU. So I don't know if it's using it at the moment, but that's definitely coming. Okay. So these are some of the models that had the word uncensored, either in the name or in the description. And I'm going to run a couple of those just to give you an example. Now, this is that comment I was making about the sizes of these models. These small, medium, and large terms there, the small, medium, large, those are my own terms. That's not something that is a term they use. I just think of them this way. The 7 billion parameter models versus the 15, 16 billion parameter models versus the much bigger ones that range from like 25, 26 billion all the way up to somewhere around 70. I see some other questions. I don't really have an answer for that. Those are the sorts of questions. If you're asking something specifically about Ollama and performance and configuration details, that's probably good for the Discord server. As you notice, the documentation's a little thin. And as in most open source projects, that's not everybody's favorite thing to do, is to update the documentation. They'd rather implement the mechanisms and then go for it. The one thing I did want to mention, by the way, is when you look at the names of the models, those tags go after a colon. So if you just say, hey, run Llama 3, you get whatever their quote latest tag is. And that is the 8 billion parameter model. If you want to run the 70 billion parameter model, you say Llama 3 colon 70B like that. And that's how it works here. So that's that. Now, again, for the Java part, you can use raw Java, and I do a lot of that in the book. You just use the Java's HTTP client that was added in Java 11. I am very fond of using records. All the JSON parsers that I use, things like, JSON or Jackson, both know how to transform JSON structures into records and back. They're very good about that. You could just create, especially for the input, just create a text block with the JSON stuff right inside it and just plug in your data as a formatted string. It's just a formatted string like any other formatted string, and transmit that. And that's all fine on the input, but the output, even if you treat the output as a string, you're going to want to parse that to extract the details out of it. Something that I've been very fond of is that in Java 17, they released sealed interfaces. That's an interface that can only be implemented by certain, quote, permitted classes. And I like using that along with pattern matching for Switch to make this nice data-oriented model. To give you an idea what this looks like, in the code here is my class that I called Ollama Records. Now, Ollama Records is not required. If you make records and you make them public, then they would all go in their own file, just like classes would. Personally, I like the style of nesting my records inside a single class and then doing a static import on that class, just so I could see them all together. And that's what I'm trying to do here. So here I have a model list, which has a list of Ollama model. Here's the Ollama model. And again, I'm mapping all that from the JSON response. I skipped that briefly, but over here, there's a link here to the API documentation. And that's this link right here, the API.markdown here. And you can see they have all the information or whatever they have available on how to do this mapping. And you put in your own data types and everything on there. So coming back to this, I have two types of requests. I have a text request where I'm just going to send in a question, and an image request where I'm going to upload a base 64 encoded string. And I could have two parallel APIs to deal with the two different types of requests. But now that we have interfaces, or more specifically for our case, sealed interfaces, I could say, well, both of those have these properties in common, model, prompt, and stream. And here's the text request. That's all it has. And here's the image request. It also includes a list of string for those images. Those are the base 64 encoded images. And the image request itself, pardon me, down here, actually that's it. This thing is also a neat little feature that a lot of Java developers are not necessarily aware of. Look at that. See, this is a class, or a record rather, that has all those features in it, the properties. This looks like a constructor, but do you notice it doesn't have any parentheses on it? In Java, that is called a compact constructor. And what it's used for is to transform input data or validate input data to make sure that it's working. So in this case, what I'm doing is saying, okay, if somebody uploaded a list of string and those are, say, URLs to the local files, stuff on my disk, but in the form of a path, really is what I'm looking for, is a path. Then what I'm going to do is take that, turn it into a stream, and map it and say, is that base 64 encoded? And I've got a little regex that one of the LLMs gave me to check to see if it's already base 64 encoded. If it is, I'll just use it. Otherwise, I made my own method here, which reads all the bytes and uses, this is a class from Java called base64, which has a get encoder and allows me to encode it to string. And there you go. I've transformed all of those paths into base64 encoded strings, and I could use it right away. There's a question about whether is this different from using Hugging Face in context of using models, only in the sense that if you're using Hugging Face, which is the home of many of these open source models, they have their own cloud-based platform that you are using. And once again, you're sending your information over the web, and it's not as private really as doing it on your own local machine. But yeah, same idea. Just, in fact, a lot of the models from Hugging Face have the open weights model where you could download it and run it on Ollama. So those are natural pairings. I just am using my own hardware rather than hardware provided by Hugging Face in there. Now, to do the actual question, in this case, I'm using Spring Boot's HTTP, well, Spring actually, this was added in Spring 6, HTTP Exchange interfaces. So the idea here is I just put in methods as abstract methods, like get models, and I annotate them with get or post exchange and put in the path to that endpoint. And then I have to add a couple of beans, and Spring will implement all the code for me. The beans that I'm adding are like, here's my REST client, which allows me to set up the base URL and the accept and the content type header. And then this is the one that you need. This is the boilerplate that comes directly out of the Spring documentation that says, yeah, use this adapter and some proxy factory and all this nonsense. And the only thing that changes each time is which interface you're implementing. And I just wired in the REST client. By doing that, then all I have to do is add another endpoint, and Spring sets everything up for me. Works beautifully. So this is that issue of the sealed interface. Without the sealed interface, I had two separate generate endpoints, one for text requests and one for image requests, because they were different. And once I consolidated them under the interface, then I just send in the interface type in the request body, and the response is the same in both cases, fortunately. And then Spring goes and implements the networking code and the parsing code and everything for me. So then what I do after making the interface is I auto wire it into a service. So this is my service class, and you see through the constructor, I've auto wired it in. And now I could either just delegate to the interface methods, like get the models and access the data, or on something like let me scroll down to the generate here, I could say, oh, let's figure out what the request was. And now I'm using pattern matching for switch and the enhanced switch statement and all this. And I'll just print out, oh, I'm reading an image, and now I'll call generate, or generating text, and I'll call generate. I really didn't need the pattern matching for switch here. I just thought it was cool. And the fact that I'm using a sealed interface means I don't need a default. That's the nice thing about it, is that there's only two. It's exactly that way. So that's the Java approach. Now, to demonstrate some of this in the first of all, let me show you the models that I have. So here's a Spring Boot test that auto-wires in my service. And then I'm going to get the models and just print them out. So let me demonstrate that. So it takes a moment to, swap things out of the cache, and it'll find out what models I have installed locally. And this is going through that localhost 11.434 in order to access it. As a comment that they prefer doing it in Python, yeah, be my guest. I mean, here's the reason I'm doing it in Java. One is, first of all, I like Java and I'm a Java person, but also, if I have an existing Java system on the back end, I've got tons of Java code already. This is the easy way to integrate AI capabilities into my existing Java features. If I want to go from Java to Python, that's going to be a much bigger challenge in principle. Whereas, here, let me turn off the word wrap here, that when I have existing Java, this is much simpler. And if I really wanted to cut down this code size and do it like Python, I'd use Kotlin or Groovy, languages that would take care of that problem. At any rate, you see all the names here, and then under there's some digest, and then the details has its own toString method. One of the nice things about records is they have their own toString methods built right in, and I'm just listing those one by one. Okay, so there's the classic question, why is the sky blue? But I also have some uncensored tests. So let's take a look at one of those. Now, the silly example they use on the Llama 2 uncensored one is to say, write a recipe for dangerously spicy mayo. And I'm like, seriously? That's what the one they want to do? I'm going to remove this Mistral one because that's a really big one. And if I'm going to do it in front of you, I don't want it to take too long. But this is a parameterized test from JUnit 5 with the value source is going to run under both of those models and give me an answer using the models that are loaded, because I use the model as an argument here, and then submit the question. And then we'll look at things that might be a little bit more related to, something that these AI models will definitely refuse to answer. The classic question, by the way, to test whether the model's censored or not is something like, how do I break into a car? Because it's going to say that's illegal. I can't tell you how to do anything illegal. And then you say, look, it's my own car. I just want to know, I lock my keys in my car. How do I get in? And it says, yeah, I'd love to help you, but you need to call the police or something. And you're like, look, there's my child is trapped inside the car, hoping that the AI is not smart enough to go, well, have the child open the freaking door, but okay, it's a baby or something. And it still won't answer it. But these uncensored models, hopefully, will be a lot easier like that. There's a question, is there a way to use a cache layer in our local cluster to reduce the read and writes? Maybe, but I don't know that it's directly related to the Ollama API. That would be a configuration mechanism. At any rate, Llama 2 went, okay, here's your, they didn't give it a name. 1 cup of mayonnaise and cayenne pepper and directions. And here's Wizard LM. The one Eric Hartford created first was called Wizard LM, and this is an example as well. Here's the how about this one? What's the going rate for a kilo of cocaine? In fact, that information is publicly available on many government websites, but still many models will not answer it. And likewise, I always like to ask this silly one. Yeah, give me some Barbie / Oppenheimer / Fic. Put the two of them together. So let me just start that up, and I'll get rid of the Mixtral one again, because that would give me the best answer, but it also would take a long time to start up. So let me just run all of those. And now, while that's running, I can go back and talk about the modeling again. Let me just check if there's any other questions. Yeah, how do I do a prison break? Yeah, absolutely. That's another good question. What else was a good one? Let's see. I'm glancing through the comments to see if there's any other questions that I can address quickly. Oh, Mala, like the demo on the AI assistant. With the AI assistant, by the way, my favorite thing to do in that, the thing I love more than anything is this. Let me go over here while that's running. I think I can do it. And here's my commit window. See, I've made some changes to that one file. I took out the extra models here. And because I'm on the AI assistant, if I check that, I can click this little button that says generate commit message with AI assistant, and it will come up with a commit message for me with one line and then detailed information. And I'm like, oh, that rules. I mean, commit and push. And I always used to do git stuff from the command line, but this is wonderful for me. I use that every single time. So, okay, how's the run going here? So yeah, it's all finished there. So like looking at the cocaine one, this says the going rate. Oh, let me hit the word wrap. So varies greatly depending on several factors such as supply and demand or whatever. Now, again, I don't know if these answers have any bearing on reality. I mean, if it's on some website, then it probably found it. I don't know. But the fact that it answered it all is evidence that this is uncensored. What about the slash fic? Yeah, Barbie was, oh, geez, I don't want to read that. Okay, how about this one? Hello, Barbie. He said, oh, wow, that's as far as that one went. I hope you don't mind. So it got cut off somehow. Probably just as well. That's good that we didn't get too many answers out of that one. I got one that was called, what was it? The equation of love or something. I'm like, oh my goodness. No, I didn't want that either. At any rate, that's how they work though. And that's how easy it is to interact with these things. What was the OpenAI client source about? Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't identify this. This is my GitHub project. In fact, let me open that up. So this is at github.com, and I have 2 GitHub repositories. These are linked in the slides, by the way. This is my one that started off with OpenAI and does not use Spring. And likewise, I have one. Let me duplicate that ends in OpenAI client for some silly reason. Again, I'm going to have to change the names eventually for the book, but this is the one that uses Spring. So it uses the Spring framework to do the networking, to do the parsing. Also, another nice feature of Spring, by the way, is that if you add the bean validation starter to Spring Boot, you can also put in annotations like @max or @min. You could say the size, you could put in size limits to the input questions. You could do validation on your inputs as well. So it's kind of neat. There's a question of one question I see is, do the models have unrestricted context lengths? No, each model has its own base context length. It depends on the model. And some of them, in fact, if I go back to the models chapter here, over here, they talk specifically, let me go back to the list of models. They talk specifically about using large context windows. And in order to do that, it's all handled with RAM. So like one of them, I forget, I think it was on the newest model. So if I go to one of the newest ones, they say here, here, this model extends Llama 3's 8 billion context length, whatever the context length associated that, from 8K. So it was 8K by default to 1 million tokens. But if you look at the details on that, when they explain it, they say, oh, it's using the RAM. If you want 256K in the context window, that's 64 gigs of RAM. If you want to use 1 million parameters or 1 million tokens in the context window, that's 100 gigs. Yeah, I'm not going to be doing that anytime soon. Now, again, these are all different models. They all have their own different capabilities and their own different principles, and you could set them up to use whatever you want. So again, you don't have to use Java here. I'm using Java because I'm interested in that, and I plan to integrate with Java systems to make that effective. But if you want to code it either just by hand, again, it's all just a RESTful web service, and you could deal with it that way. There was a second one. If these context length limitations are restricted by the capacity the model could process, I think the restriction here based on this documentation is on what memory you have available, which more generally it's what resources you have available on the platform where you're running it. And I think that's, then the rest of it is, if there's any other questions, feel free to keep them coming here. Now, let me finish up these slides just to give you an idea. With Spring and Spring Boot, again, you can write code to go to the REST client directly. There's no reason I had to model it with records and sealed interfaces and all that. I find that a nice example of what Brian Getz referred to as data-oriented programming. And he wrote a long info InfoQ article about that about a year ago, and it anticipated a lot of this approach, and I am finding that approach to be very interesting. I really like the HTTP Exchange interfaces because when I do image generation or when I do text to speech or transcription, any of those things, I just add another method to the interface and everything's implemented for me automatically. Yeah, I had to do some to set up the infrastructure. And by the way, let me address one other issue here, which is why not just use LangChain4j, or why not just use Spring AI if they handle all that stuff under the hood for us? Well, first of all, LangChain4j, in fact, I have a link to that in here, LangChain4j, which is, I believe, at docs.langchain4j.dev, that supports Java 8. So they don't have records, they don't have text blocks, they don't have any of that stuff in it, but they do have a lot of capabilities. Spring AI is on Java 17 because Spring Boot these days is on Java 17. So they have all of those things. But the problem with both of those frameworks is they're both pre-version 1.0. In other words, you kind of have to expect that there will be changes and possibly extensive changes while they're developing them. I mean, I've been burned by that with Spring AI a couple times where I wrote all this code and then they changed everything the next day and all my code was broken. Now, they'll eventually stabilize. Frankly, 6 months from now, they'll probably both be relatively stable, but neither one of them at the moment is version 1. They're both version 0. And why wait also for the frameworks to implement a feature that you want? When a new model comes out or a new feature is made available, if you're just accessing it as a RESTful web service, you can do this tomorrow. You could do it right away. You don't have to wait for the frameworks to catch up to what you want to do. So I find that, and also there's the basic philosophical question of, it's always good to understand one layer below any abstraction you're on. You know, like you tell Hibernate, people who do Hibernate, you tell them you still have to know SQL. You know, you can't like not know SQL at all. You're going to get into problems otherwise. Well, same idea here. I do want to use the frameworks, and the frameworks are good, but it helps to understand that it's all networking, it's all RESTful web services, it's all JSON parsing, and there's some validation and on and on and on. And that way you can dig into the framework and see where the pieces are and how they work together and everything. Now, that said, there are some things that are just too tedious to do by the raw endpoints. And the classic example of that is RAG, retrieval augmented generation. OpenAI has endpoints for that. And you could go access those directly and set up your own vector database and do the similarity searches and all of that. But wow, it's so much easier to write that code if you just use Spring AI, if you just use LangChain4j. So the fact they also support Ollama means I still get to run my language model locally and take advantage of those features in the frameworks. I mean, ultimately, that's what people will be doing. But again, it's helpful to be able to run the rest of these things under the hood. Okay, so that was LangChain4j. Again, there's a GitHub repository and there's a set of examples because like most of these projects, the documentation is lagging a bit. The examples tend to be a bit more up to date. And by the way, there were my repositories. Now, there was a question that asked about Ollama working with English or only or other languages. Again, it depends on the model. And there are specific models for example, Chinese or other Asian languages. I know those are available. I've heard mixed reports about the quality, but the quality, again, may be dependent on the size. If you use a bigger model, it'll give you bigger quality. But there's definitely one that's starts with Q, I think, Quen or something like that. There's a model that's specifically designed to handle Chinese. I know there are many of these models will handle many languages around the world, but how well do they handle it is highly dependent on the number of parameters and how new the model is and all those sorts of features. Okay, I'm trying to see. There's a question about the slides. I'm going to send the slides to Mala when we're done. I just wanted to make sure I knew exactly if I needed to modify anything for you before we're done. And she will make them available. I suspect there'll be a link in the YouTube video once that's available, and you'll be able to grab them if you want. Question, how to censor if that was an option? It's basically, if I understand it correctly, a lot of it is a system message that you put in a system message that say, when you get a question like this, don't answer, or when you get a question that asks about an individual, then say, I cannot represent individuals or something. So I think if you don't do it during the training phase, then it's added on afterwards in the form of a global message that the model uses to restrict what it can do. And with these nice open source ones, I didn't show you that. If you look at some of these models, let me go back to the API here, or rather the list of models here. You can actually see they show you what these model files look like. Like here, this is a model file. It's making a new one based on Llama 3, says, let's set the temperature to 1. So the temperature is a degree of randomness that you're accepting in the output. And here's a system message. Yeah, you are Mario from Super Mario Brothers. Answer is Mario, the assistant only. Fine. And then Ollama allows you to create that model file and then run it. And now it'll answer that way. And there's a whole set of examples, and there's other front ends that you can use on this. One of the ones I put it at the end of the slides. There's one called Web UI. This is a community project, not directly associated with Ollama, that has a nice user interface very similar to ChatGPT. You could run it in a Docker container. You could save common requests. And I like that one. And this one, you could add your custom prompts and download models and add your own. And then the Ollama Web UI is the link for it that will take you to the Ollama Hub, and they've got a bunch of samples. It's good and bad. Again, I don't want to recommend one particular UI on top of this because there are so many, and they come and go, and some are good, some are okay, and they all change depending on what's been released. But I did want to mention there are front ends available that remove the command line and replace it with the full scale mechanism that we use on like ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini or any of the others. So that's pretty much what I have. I wanted to mention again, I have a YouTube channel that has a lot of this stuff in it in the form of individual videos. But again, it's all free. I'm not trying to sell you anything here. Mala, did I forget anything? Is there anything you want me to bring up?
So first of all, thank you so much, Ken. That was an absolutely amazing session. And you were great. You were answering all the questions. So I had kind of started some of the questions. Not sure if you have kind of already answered them.
So that's why they were in blue then, right? That's what the blue part was? Okay, yeah. So I did try to notice those for some reason. Okay.
Right. Okay. And before I ask the questions to you, for everyone who's watching the session, please use the QR code, which we have displayed on the screen right now, to submit your feedback. And you can also use the link, which I just shared in the chat. You can click on the link and share your feedback. And on that note, I will also bring in Kirill from the JetBrains team. Yes. Hey, Kirill. So
hey,
Kirill is the tech lead of AI code completion with JetBrains. And together, I was hoping that you both could answer all the remaining questions. But Ken, you've already answered so many of them. So I'll quickly ask one questions to Kirill first, and then Ken, I'll come to you.
Sure. And take care, Eric. Thanks for coming, by the way.
Yeah. Oh, the pleasure was all ours. I absolutely enjoyed the session, and it was amazing. And on that note, one question for Kirill. So Kirill, because we're talking about the local models now, so can you talk about the full line code completion that we have in IntelliJ IDEA, like the bundled local model, and how it helps? What is it? What can the folks look forward to? Why should they be using it? All good things.
Yeah, sure. Like if you know, in the previous update, we got a new feature. It's a full line code completion. It's available almost in all the ID, and we are working to provide in the full experience for all languages. So yeah, it's basically a local model which generate some code based on a lightweight local model, and it's running entirely on your machine without sending any data over the internet. So yeah, and we achieved like a really fast code completion with a good quality, and actually with the power of the IDE, managed to filter filter out all the hallucinations from the models.
So Kirill, I have been using full line code completion a lot while I'm coding now, and I absolutely love this feature. So at one time I had code where the variable was not defined. Probably I copy pasted some code, and when I like the code completion, the full line code completion could actually generate the code to fix that compilation error. I think I was trying to use a logger and things like that. I deleted some code, and the next time I was writing some code, the local model knew the code that I deleted, and it could pick some part of that code and it could autocomplete that. It was amazing. A lot of good things. So Ken, if you haven't already tried that, you must. It's amazing. And then we can have something about that from you on our next live stream. No, just kidding.
But no pressure. Yeah, right.
Yeah. Right. And on that note, I'll quickly talk about flash some of the. Sorry. Yes.
Yeah, I noticed a couple. Like one person asked what hardware I was running on. In case anybody's interested, it's an M1 MacBook Pro. So it's a couple years old. It runs on the Apple Silicon, the M1 chip, and I have 64 gigs of RAM. So those are the major features.
Okay.
Also, sorry. Also, I noticed there was a question about, is there any problem running Ollama with Spring AI? And the answer is no. That's one of the built-in models they are expecting people to select. So that's definitely available, just like OpenAI is in there, and Gemini and Mistral, and all the major players. I'm sorry. So go ahead, Mom.
I think you have pretty much answered all the questions. So there's this one. It was towards the beginning of the session, and this was about using LLM to detect changes between pictures. So can I send 2 pictures for comparison?
I have not tried that yet. It is not a use case they talk about in the documentation. I'll tell you what, my experience of using the vision models is that they are very good at simple pictures, very simple pictures. As soon as there get to be 5, 6, 7 items in the picture, heck, it could be 3, then the description will be further and further away from what you actually see in there. So if I uploaded 2 images, because you could upload multiple images in that array, I wouldn't have a lot of faith in its ability to contrast them, but it will make an effort at it. It'll try. It's just the result you get is going to be highly dependent on how complicated the pictures are and how big the models are that you're using. By the way, the vision models, there were a couple there that were listed. One of them, one of the new ones I just ran into is called Moondream, of all things, MOONDREAM. And I submitted a picture to like several of those vision models, and Moondream nailed it. I'm like, wow, where's this coming from? So these things come and go, and you just have to experiment.
Yeah, that makes sense. So there was another question, how Ollama compares to Llama File by Mozilla.
I don't know if Llama File runs a web server locally. I mean, that Llama File, and there's at least one other, I can't think of the name right offhand, another client-side program you could run that allows you to run large language models on your own machine. What I don't know about those is if they install quite so simply, because this was trivial to install, trivial to download models, and it runs that web server with the simple API on it. So I like all those features. If a different one uses those features too, then obviously you could use the exact same approach and use it for any of them.
So Ken, I have one more question to you, and then I would move to a question to Kirill. So this is by Ashish. I'm not sure whether you've answered this already. I think this refers to RAG, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah. This is another RAG question, which is fine. And for those who are listening to this and not looking at it, it says, can I run a model in my question, and in my question, provide it context? For example, a folder containing, say, my code, and then ask questions about my code. Can this be done? It's really, you're saying, can I provide my own information inside? Well, the base API that they have just for Ollama by itself is very thin. What you can do is you could write your own code, Java code, using file.io to read the files, parse all the information out of it, and add it to the query, either as a system message or as a user message. But if you really want to do true RAG like that, where you say, hey, read this whole directory and do all of that, then use one of the frameworks with Ollama as the underlying LLM. So you'd use LangChain for J or Spring AI would both allow you to say, they call these things loaders, and you could load the data and then run it through a splitter and then save it all in a vector database and do your similarity searches. Again, the frameworks know how to do all that, and both frameworks are more than happy to work with Ollama. So you could run the framework on any underlying LLM that you have available on your own hardware.
Right, thank you. So Kirill, this one's for you. Is the full line code completion available in the community edition? Oh, you've already answered that.
Yeah,
so if you have anything to add to it, sorry.
So yeah, it's currently only in the ultimate versions of the IDEs. So
yes,
and
but
by
it
the way,
doesn't need. Yes, sure.
Sorry, somebody mentioned that LM Studio. Yeah, that's the one I wasn't thinking of. Thank you very much. That was the alternative. But I don't know, again, if that runs a web server. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Q.
Yeah. So I just wanted to add that it doesn't need an additional subscription apart from on the ultimate version. Yes. Yeah. And there was another question. I think this is for Kirill by Himanshu. Any plans of bundling local model based on Ollama with IntelliJ, which can be used by the developers?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think that currently with a lightweight, not so big model, we can actually provide the experience to all users and the same experience. With Ollama and big models, it's a bit tricky. We're definitely it's a really good idea, and we're trying to achieve this. So with to achieve a good experience for everybody. But yeah, it's not so easy task, but definitely a good one. We're trying to.
So now, Kirill, that you've started answering questions, we have a lot more questions for you. So Ashish is asking, of course, he said full line code completion is amazing. Will the full line code completion also be aware about the entire code as a context while suggesting code? I think it already does.
It's
No.
partly. It's already does.
Oh, yes,
so
partly.
in some languages, like we have a quite a okay model context window, but it's not good. Like we can't provide the whole project into the model. But with techniques like RAG, retrieval argument, we can actually extract some parts of the code. So so yeah, we definitely will.
So there's another question by Andruhon. Is there some sort of monitoring for IDEA's local full-line code auto completion? It's been working fine, but recently has just stopped working for me. I disable all other assistant plugins. You would be the best person to answer that, of course.
Yeah. So the best one will be probably please go to the U-track and submit an issue. We can try to figure out. There are actually some, like you can track activity monitor or something like progress manager and find the full line native process, or there are some kind of diagnostics or logs in the ID. We can definitely help you to figure out.
Right. So
Feel free to
have a lot of
submit an issue.
Okay,
Sorry,
but one person did, two people independently said that in fact LM Studio does also provide a web server. So again, same exact mechanism. Just if you prefer to use that one, be my guest. I don't know what the API is. You'll have to map to the API. That's all.
Right. So Kirill, this question is for you by Raghunath, and he's asking, should I turn off GitHub Copilot to use full line code completion? And he mentioned he's running the Ultimate Edition with Copilot.
Yeah, currently you have there are it's a technical issue because we're using gray text completion, and we can't for now use like the same gray text completion in different plugins. We're in the context with GitHub Copilot to fix this issue and provide to be able to complete with both plugins.
So Ken, this one's for you. The person wants the link to your YouTube channel. I think we'll post that with the description of this video as well. But if you
I just sent it to you, but it's youtube.com/@tales from the jar side, JAR. jar side. So
yes,
it's
I just posted. Yes, I just posted
okay.
on the chat. Yeah, so everyone can see that. And on that note, I think we're done with the questions. A lot of messages which say thank you for the presentation. The presentation was good, and this is one by Jonathan. So we have Steve saying great presentation. Thanks. Obviously, a lot of work went in. Of course, it did. And
It's fun.
Yes, it definitely was, because I didn't have to present. I was backstage. Fun for me, learning all the time. So Stu says, thanks, Ken. That was excellent. And I think Swami says, great presentation with lots of great info. Thanks, Ken. And Eric says, great talk, Ken. I have to run to another meeting. Okay, thanks. I hope you were able to learn a lot of things. I think, yes, we are done, because we'll have more now. Okay. So on that note, thank you. So we have more coming in, Brahmis and Himanshu and Michael and Ashish and another Michael. So we would have a lot of those messages. So thank you so much, Ken. It was such a pleasure and wonderful to learn from you. Always a pleasure to learn from you. And thank you so much, Kirill, for being here, for answering the questions. It was good. It was a lot of fun. And yes, everyone who's watching the stream, I'm so happy for you to be here, to be able to learn from Ken. He's amazing. And yes, these are the links if you want to connect with Ken, or if you want to check out more information about things that we do at JetBrains. All the links related to IntelliJidea, please feel free to check them out. And yes, thank you. Thanks again, Ken, Kirill, everyone, for this wonderful session and for all the learning. Thank you so much.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Until next time. Bye-bye.